Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are taking a fascinating look right under the hood of human movement. We're going to be decoding the fundamental building blocks of athletic performance. Things like, what exactly is a skill and what defines an ability? And we're drawing specifically from the foundational knowledge in the Cambridge AS level sport and physical education syllabus.
That's right. And our mission today is, well, it's pretty crucial, to really analyze and coach high-level performance. You first have to master the language, the classification system that governs movement. We define skills as these coordinated patterns of movement. They're learned, they get polished through practice, and they're always goal-oriented.
Okay, so skills are learned.
Right. And then you have abilities. They're the opposite, really. They're the foundational, often enduring, and genetically determined traits that underpin all of those skills.
So we have the learned, trainable part, and then the inherent, sort of stable part. That distinction, I think, is the core of our deep dive today. We're going to give you a comprehensive toolkit, starting with the 6 classification continua that define skills, and then we'll get into the characteristics of abilities themselves.
Exactly. Let's begin with those skill continua. It's really important for you to remember that the syllabus talks about these not as rigid boxes, but as spectra. A spectrum. Skills can fall anywhere along that line, not just at one end or the other. And crucially, to really succeed, you don't just list a category. You have to justify why a movement belongs where you place it.
Right, that justification part is where the real high-level analysis comes in. So let's start with the basics. How do we categorize the action itself? Let's ignore the environment for just a moment. What are the first few continua that help us do that?
We can begin with muscular involvement. This runs from fine to gross. Fine skills involve these small, very precise movements. They rely on high levels of accuracy, minimal power. Think about the little wrist flick in snooker.
Or threading a needle, maybe.
Perfect example. Whereas gross skills, they require large muscle groups for power, for speed, for strength.
Yeah.
The full body rotation in a discus throw or an explosive clean and jerk in weightlifting.
So fine is all about precision, and gross is about force and scale. That's pretty clear. What's next? How do we classify movement based on its flow?
That would be continuity. And this one is a bit unique because it has 3 points on the spectrum. We start with discrete skills. These have a very clear, identifiable start and end, a single penalty kick in soccer, for instance.
A single defined effort.
Exactly. Then you have serial skills. These are maybe the most misunderstood. They're sequences. Several discrete skills linked together in a very specific order to create a bigger performance. Think of a triple jump. The hop, the step, and the jump. They're all discrete actions, but they have to happen in that order.
Right, they're bolted together to form one event.
Precisely. And finally, we have continuous skills. These are cyclical, they're repetitive, and there's no clear start or end. Running, cycling, rowing.
The triple jump as a serial skill makes perfect sense now. Okay, let's look at the next 2, which I think people often confuse. Difficulty and organization.
Yes. The third continuum is difficulty, from basic to complex. A basic skill has a low attentional demand, very few subroutines, and minimal decision-making. A complex skill, on the other hand, needs high cognitive effort, multiple coordinated parts, and a lot of information processing, often under pressure.
And we'll come back to that idea of information processing later. Right?
Absolutely, it's critical for justification. And the fourth is organization, running from high organization to low. This one can be tricky. It's all about whether you can break the skill down for practice.
So low organization is easy to break down.
Yes. You can practice the parts in isolation, like just the arm action of a swimming stroke. But high organization skills are incredibly difficult, maybe impossible to break down without completely destroying the skill's rhythm and timing.
Wait, I have a challenge on that. We always use the tennis serve as the classic example of high organization.
Yeah.
But I see tennis players practicing just the ball toss all the time. Doesn't practicing that one part separately mean the skill is breakable, so low organization?
That is an excellent point. And it really requires us to fine-tune the definition. You're right, the toss can be practiced alone. But the ballistic phase, that explosive action of the racket coming up and through, that's the core high organization part.
I see.
If you try to practice just the middle of that swing and stop, you lose all the timing, all the momentum. The toss is just preparatory. The main rapid execution of a highly organized skill is indivisible. Think of a golf swing. The power comes from that integrated sequential movement.
Got it. The core ballistic movement has to stay whole. That clarifies a lot. Okay, let's move on to where the psychology really kicks in. The 2 continuas that deal with external pressure and performer control.
This is where we shift from just the mechanics to the cognitive demands. We're looking at the environmental influence continuum. It runs from open to closed, and it's fundamentally about predictability.
Predictability. Yeah, that's the perfect word for it.
Absolutely. A closed skill happens in a stable, predictable environment. The key variables, the surface, the equipment, they don't change. The performer can pre-plan everything. Archery, a gymnastics floor routine, Olympic weightlifting, they're perfect examples.
But the world of almost every team sport is the complete opposite of stable.
Exactly. And that brings us to the open skill. It's performed in an unstable, unpredictable environment, dictated by external factors, opponents, the ball, the weather. Receiving a pass in football, a rally in squash. Open skills place a huge cognitive burden on the athlete, constant perception, real-time decision-making, adaptation.
And that cognitive load is what separates the elite from the amateur.
Okay, so from the environment to control. Let's talk about the pacing continuum, externally paced versus internally paced. This is all about who or what controls the speed and the start of the movement. An externally paced skill means the speed is controlled by the environment or an opponent. If you're batting in cricket, the bowler decides when it all starts. You have to react.
The performer is totally reactive. So an internally paced or self-paced skill is the opposite. The performer has full control. A golf swing, a dart throw. The athlete controls the timing.
And this is where we can connect this continuum directly back to the psychology of learning, specifically to feedback. Internally paced skills allow for much greater use of intrinsic feedback. That's the information you get through your own senses during or right after the movement.
How critical is that specific feedback loop for elite development?
Oh, it's foundational. Because the performer controls the pace, the sensory input, the feel of the club hitting the ball, that balance, clean, immediate. It isn't interrupted by external chaos. They can link that internal sensory experience directly to the outcome, which makes these skills, well, highly effective for self-correction. That internal feel is the gold standard.
So controlling the pace gives you the best conditions for that internal processing and self-correction. That's a huge insight. Okay, let's shift gears completely. We've covered learned pattern skills. Now let's look at the bedrock. Abilities.
Abilities are the engine, not the car. They are your inherent capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a really specific set of characteristics that make them different from skills.
What really stands out about their nature?
First and foremost, they're innate. They are genetically determined. You're born with them. You don't learn flexibility. You just possess a certain amount of it. Second, they're underpinning. They form the essential basis for all skill development. If you don't have the underlying ability for coordination, you'll never develop the skill of playing the piano.
And the third characteristic is about their stability, right?
Yes, they're enduring. They're stable and relatively permanent. This is so key for coaches to understand. Your underlying ability for something like reaction time might improve a little with training, but it's not going to fluctuate day to day like a skill might. They basically set the boundaries for what's possible.
So the goal is for a performer to combine those stable inherent abilities, let's say reaction time and strength endurance, to then underpin the learned skill of, say, defending in hockey.
Exactly. Understanding that dual nature stable foundation versus flexible learned behavior is fundamental to any serious analysis.
Which brings us perfectly to the end goal for any learner: high-level application. The syllabus specifically requires you to justify your classifications. It's an AO2 requirement. You can't just state the answer.
This is the vital question, isn't it? What does justify really mean here? It means you have to support your classification with evidence, with an argument. You have to apply a theory. It's not enough to just say a skill is complex. You have to argue why using the concepts we've discussed.
And as we hinted at earlier, the strongest argument for classifying a skill as complex often involves information processing. How does that work in an answer?
Well, we use the theory of information processing to kind of quantify the demand. A basic skill like rolling a ball requires almost no information load, but a complex skill like a penalty save puts immense pressure on the whole system.
Okay, so let's break that down into the 3 stages of processing.
Right, take the penalty save. The complexity is justified because of the demands on the goalie. First, perception. They have to rapidly process information, the kicker's body angle, where they're looking, the ball's trajectory. Second, decision-making. In milliseconds, they have to choose the right response. It's a high-stakes, high-speed decision. And third, the response itself. They had to initiate the right motor program at high speed to get there.
And the need to do all of that so fast, under pressure, is what makes it complex.
That is precisely why it's classified as a highly complex skill. That detailed, theory-driven link is what secures those top marks.
It's connecting the classification to the how, the cognitive theory. And just to reinforce the mechanism behind these actions, we know complex skills are learned and stored as motor programs, these sort of predetermined series of movements.
And those motor programs are not static. They're incredibly flexible. They get modified in real time by something called schema theory. The performer adjusts the movement, how hard to hit it, where to aim based on the situation. This allows a learned skill to adapt, which is crucial in those open environments.
This deep dive has, I think, really broken down performance into its parts. The learned patterns we call skills, classified by these 6 different continuas, and the stable, innate foundations we call abilities.
Hmm.
You should now have the cognitive toolkit to classify, analyze, and justify performance at a much higher level.
Which leaves us with a powerful final thought for you to consider. If abilities really are innate and enduring, if they form the ultimate, stable basis for acquiring skill, what does that mean for an elite athlete? If they've already mastered every technique and applied every theory, reaching the limit of their skill training, what does that implication of stable genetic limits mean for where they go next? Does human performance eventually just hit a biological ceiling, or can effort fundamentally reshape our innate capacity?
A profound thought to end on. Mastering the classification of skill is the first step in deconstructing performance. Find your revision blueprints at revisedirect.com.